Okay, good evening, everyone. Hope all of you are doing well. We're learning tonight Maseches Pesachim Daf Kuf Tes Vav. Learning Kuf Tes Vav. We're on the bottom of Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis. I strangely stopped in a strange place last night. My apologies. So what we're going to do is go back just a couple of lines to make sure that it's you guys, is everybody ready to learn some Torah today? What's happening right now?
It's like breakfast. You start again.
Welcome. Should I start the video again too? So we're gonna. I stopped in a strange place last night, so we're just gonna go back just a couple of lines so we can have a clean start for tonight. We're toward the bottom of Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis, about 2/3 of the way down at My Shnei Tavshilin, and we're actually going to push to the Mishnah on Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. We're going to go a little further than usual. I know, Michael, you're excited because if you look at the next, plot of Kuf Yud Zayin, it is no small feat. So we're just going to try to push a little bit to make sure that we can make it to Shabbos without overstraining our schedules. So 2/3 of the way down, we had mentioned in a brisa that there should be 2 tavshilin that were brought, and we said yesterday, my shnei tavshilin. The first shita was Amar Rav Huna, silka va'aroza, beets and rice, and Rava hava mehadra silka va'aroza, hol v'nafik b'pumit Rav Huna. And then Rava, when the second he saw that Rav Huna was eating beets and rice, he changed his game and he brought beets and rice to the table, which was pretty impressive because Amar Rav Ashi shma minad Rav Huna lesta chayish lahai de Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. We saw previously the shita of Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. What did Rav Yochanan ben Nuri hold? The Tanya, Rav Yochanan ben Nuri Omer Orez min Dagan. Rav Yochanan ben Nuri says we have barley, rye, oat, wheat, spelt, browse, the 5 chameshes mine Dagan. Rav Yochanan ben Nuri says there's 6. You got to include rice as well. Orez min Dagan hu v'chayavan al chimutzo kares v'adam yotze b'dechovas b'pesach. That's the parameter that we saw earlier in the Masechta. That in order to be yotze with a type of grain for matzah, it has to at least be eligible to become chametz. So you need both. You can't just have one. It can't just be abal chimutz, but it's not chayiv kares for chametz. If it's not going to be chayiv kares for chametz, then it's not going to be matzah when it's not chametz. So that's what Rav Yochanan ben Nuri holds about rice, that Ataka is the case. So that's what the Gemara says. It's clear from here that Rav Huna did not hold of Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. And that was answer number 1 about the Shnei Tavshilin is silka ve'aroza, beets and rice. Next answer, 8-9 lines from the bottom. It could be even less sophisticated than that. It could just be fish with a little bit of egg that's on top of it. That's considered shnei tavshilin, a minimum amount of types of food that are going to be at the Seder. Of Yosef Amar, tzarich shnei minei basar, 2 types of meat. That's nothing to complain about. Echad zecher lepesach, ve'echad zecher lechagiga, because we know that on Yud Daled, there were 2 korbanos there were many korbanos. The korban tamid, of course, is brought every day. But here we had 2 types of korbanos that were specific to Pesach. We had the korban Pesach on Yud Daled. We also had the korban chagiga that was made to make sure that when you ate the korban Pesach, it was nechal ala sova, that you had been partially satiated already. So the korban chagiga would fill you up a little bit, and then you'd go back and you would eat the and you would eat the korban Pesach. Next answer, and then with this we'll close out the section from last night. This is where we should have stopped last night, is Ravina's answer. Ravina says, Ravina Amar afilu garmo bishul, even a bone with its broth, with its juices that it was cooked in, that as well could be considered 2 types of food that are brought to the table. Very good. The Pesach Sederim that I've been to in my life, we've had all of the above and then some when it comes to extra dishes. So there's not rice. Sorry, I'm not that Sephardi, but got one Sephardi guy in the room. Do you guys eat rice? No rice on Pesach? Okay, you guys aren't real Sephardi. Yeah. Says the Gemara. We had said in our Mishnah, we were discussing our Mishnah, which was very difficult. The Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Yud Gimel. That Mishnah spoke about the fact that there was 2 representations of vegetables in the Seder. We had karpas and we had moro. So the Gemara says as follows. Pshita, it's obvious to say the following. Pshita, 5-6 lines from the bottom, Kuf Yud Daled Beis. That heicha deika she'ar yerakos, when the first time we see vegetables in the beginning of the Seder for karpas, it's she'ar yerakos. It's something different than the maror, which will be later, let's say carrots, whatever it is. So then what would the halacha be? That mevarach hashar yirakos borei pri hadama va'achil. You make 1 bracha borei pri hadama on the karpas, and then you eat it. Fine. And then later in the meal, when it comes to maror, v'hadar mevarach alachilas maror, but that's really representation of asher kiddushanu b'mitzvah savet sivan v'alachilas maror. Then we say the birkas mitzvah v'alachilas maror ve'achil later in the Suda. But heicha deleke alachasa mai. What if you only have 1 type of lettuce for both, for karpas and for moro? So what are you going to do? You're going to say the bracha borei pri hadama by karpas, and then a half hour later you're going to make a separate bracha. It's the same food. It's the same food, mamish, the same exact romaine lettuce. So that's what the Gemara is bothered, or the Gemara is asking, and we'll see two different answers, machlokes and the Amoraim. Says the Gemara, first answer, Rav Huna, 3 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Rav Huna, mevarech me'ikara amaror, borei pri ha'adama ve'achil. First, you make a bracha on the maror, you say borei pri ha'adama, and then ulevesof. It's really interesting that it says amaror. It's really referring to the first usage of the food, the bitter herbs earlier by the karpas. You say borei pri ha'adama, and then later ulevesof bevarech alei alachilas mar ve'achil. So it's the same exact food. First, you make borei pri hadama, then that's for your karpas. A little bit later in the meal, when it comes time to eat the maror, then you add the bracha v'ashir kiddush mitzvah savitzvan al chilas maror. Answer Rav Huna. Says the Gemara on the top of Kuf Tes Vav Med Aleph, that does not pass the smell test. Why not? Because Maski Flo Rav Chiza, really? You stuffed your face with karpas. Fascinating, by the way. How much karpas do we eat? We always say less than a kazayas, right? So the Rambam holds you have to eat more. You have a minimum of a kazayas. You have to eat a shiur achila. Otherwise, you haven't eaten anything. It's nothing. You're allowed to make a bracha rishona, but it's not considered a shiur achila. So that's some of the rishonim pick up on this line in that regard. But anyways, Rav Chizda is bothered by Rav Huna's answer. How can you tell me that you're going to eat all of this food and then you're going to make the bracha of borei pri hadama now and ashir kiddushanu b'mitzvah savitzivanu later? It doesn't make sense. You should make both brachos together. That's why he recommends the second line, El Amar Rav Chizda. Really, from the beginning, out of the gates with the karpas, meikar mevarach le borei pri hadama v'alachilas maror. You make both borei pri hadama and ashir kiddushanu b'mitzvah savitzivanu achilas maror v'achil. Ulevisof, and when you get to the actual mitzvah of achilas maror later in the seder, then achilas chasa below bracha. Then when you come to maror, you make no bracha at all. Machlokas between the two of them. What do we do? Halacha l'maisa, machlokas. B'Surya avdei Rav Huna in Surya, they behaved like Rav Huna did, which is that first you make the borei pri hadama, and then later you say the bracha v'ashir kiddushanu b'mitzvah savitzvan achilas maror. Rav Sheshes b'red Rav Yoshua avid kit Rav Chiza. Rav Sheshes b'red Rav Yoshua machlokas. If this person ever existed, his name is a strange name. It's the only time in Shas that this name comes up. I don't know this because I've learned Shas. I know this because I heard a shiur on this topic. This might be a mistake in name. It might be Rav Sheshes b'red Rav Idi or some other iterations therein, but not clear who this person is necessarily. But anyways, Rav Sheshes was of the opinion that we held like Rav Chizda, that you put the two brachos together when you only have one type of romaine, one type of lettuce that's being presented at the Seder. V'hilchasa kavase de Rav Chizda. We talk a paskin that way. But the Gemara recommends a great solution. Ravacha b'rei de Rava mehader asher yerakos le'afuke nafshe miplugta. So now we know there's a machlokes. And granted, we have a psak. But what did he do? He said, wait, I'm going to make sure that my karpas is a different vegetable than the maror. L'chol hapachos, I should be able to get myself out of this machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Chizda because that's what the Gemara presented at the bottom of the page, that pshita, if the vegetable being used for karpas and the vegetable being used for maror were different, then I can split the brachos of borei pri hadama and ashir kiddushanu b'mitzvah savitzivanu alam alachilas maror. But if it was the same machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Chizda, so Ravacha b'rei the Rava wanted to avoid that machlokes, so he just always made sure that his karpas was made of something else. 8-9 lines down, Kuf Tes Vav Med Aleph. Let's continue. Amar Ravina, Amar Li Rav Misharshia B'Rei Rav Nasan, Hachi Amar Hillel. This is the opinion of Hillel. It is almost automatic in our brains that when we hear the name Hillel, we think of a Tana, the great Tana. But if you look at this little letter on the side in the Maseches Hashas, it says Hillel Zeh Amora Haya. This is not Hillel Hazaken. This is not Hillel the Tana. This is a reference to Hillel the Amora, and it is not simple how we know this from the Gemara, because we don't normally, we do see a language of Tana, but he's quoting a Tana. Why can't an Amora quote a Tana? Anyways, he's quoting from Hillel and Amora, Mishmei de Gemara, from Hillel's tradition. Lo nichroch inish matzah umar bahade hadade v'nechol. One should not wrap up together matzah and maror and eat them together. What does this sound like?
The reason they know it's not Hillel's the one that said to make the korban.
So that's a possibility, as we'll see soon. But there's more than one Hillel in the Tanaim also. But yeah, it's not the Hillel. That's true. We'll see Hillel. He's going to be referenced later in the Gemara. Yes, this really is what we call the Hillel's. Right, exactly. It's the Hillel sandwich, right? That's what we normally call it. So, but it's not mukhrach in the language of the Gemara, which is probably the case. But you're absolutely right. I'm sure that's why. I wonder if the Rishonim here say that, but I didn't see that. So that's what the Gemara says in the name of this Amora. You're not supposed to make the Hillel sandwich. Mishum desvira lan, because this shita, this tradition of Hillel the Amora, he holds matzah bisman azeh deoraisa, which is how we hold as well. That today eating matzah is a mitzvah deoraisa, umaror derabanan, and eating maror today is a din derabanan. Ve'asi maror derabanan umevatil le mitzvah deoraisa. That when you put together the maror, which has a mitzvah derabanan, and the matzah, which is a mitzvah deoraisa, you're mevatel. What does it mean you're mevatel the matzah? What kind of bittul are we talking about? No, we're talking about nichroch. That's what he's saying. You cannot have it mixed up in one. You can't make a sandwich out of it.
But you're saying before the maror anyway.
So that the question is here: can you be yotzei the mitzvah of matzah this way? You're right. We'll get to that a little bit later. Great point, Michael. That's correct. But let's look at both Rashi on the top of the page. The Rashbam says the same. Look at Rashi. Second dibur hamaskil mevatel le. What are you being mevatel them from? Says Rashi l'ta'am matzah deoraisa. Does that mean that if you can't taste anything, you're not yotzei the mitzvah deoraisa of matzah? Is ta'am le'ikuva? Is that a thing? It's an unbelievable idea because that's what Rashi seems to say. Rashi seems to say that the ta'am of the mitzvah of matzah is deoraisa. That's the pashtus of Rashi and the Rashbam. I don't know what happens if you have COVID and you can't taste anything. So it's or a cold in general. Yeah, I was just being inyan diyoma, but yeah. Absolutely, it's true. So, anyways, these are discussions to be had. But that's what the Gemara says here, and that's the sheet of Hillel the Amora that he says that asi mar derabanan u'mevatel lemitzvah deraisa back in the Gemara almost halfway down, and then as the Gemara as follows: ve'afilu lemanda amar mitzvos ein mevatlo zu ezu. Even according to the Shita, we'll see soon that this is Hillel the Tana. But even according to the one who holds that mitzvos cannot be mevatel one another, when is that true? Hani mili, that's only true deoraisa b'deoraisa. When the two mitzvos that you're dealing with are on the same playing field of both of them being deoraisa. Let's say maror was deoraisa, fine. Then we would agree that there's no bittul and you would be yotzei the mitzvah of matzah. Oh, or derabanan b'derabanan. Or if both of them are on the same level playing field, but both of them are derabanan. There too, we might say that they're considered that there's no bittul of one mitzvah to the next. Aval, in our case, where you have deoraisa v'derabanan, the mitzvah saseh of matzah, and the mitzvah derabanan of maror, then asi derabanan and mevatel leila deoraisa. So that's what the Gemara says in the name of Hillel, is that we're very concerned about this zecher lemikdash sandwich. It doesn't really, or I should say the Hillel sandwich as we call it. Hillel the Amora is opposed. So then says the Gemara halfway down, man tana de shamas mitzvos ein mevatlo zu ezu. Who is the shita that holds that mitzvahs are not mevatel one another, the one that we just saw? Answers the Gemara, Hillel he, not the Hillel the Amora. Now we're talking about Hillel the Tana. The page started with Hillel the Amora, who told us you cannot make a sandwich nichroch, you cannot wrap them up together. By the way, some of the Achronim point out that we know from here that their matzah wasn't brittle. We know from here that their matzah was soft because they were able to be nichroch, they were able to wrap it. So some people say, no, what you do is you wrap the lettuce around so it's like a brisker. It's not really brisk. I'm just saying it's a sharp language of like, no, it's got to be that we're wrapping this around that instead of that around this. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says. So it's Hillel. He Tanya, the Brisa writes, Amru alav al Hillel shahaya korchan bevas achas ve'ochlan shene'amar al matzos umirorim yochlu. He would look at the pasuk. The pasuk in Chumash says that you eat matzos umirorim together, and Amar of Yochanan. Rav Yochanan says that was the shita of Hillel. However, Cholken alav chaveirav al Hillel. Not everyone agreed with Hillel that you eat this sandwich because they were afraid that maybe you were not going to be yotzei this way. Why not? Says the Gemara as follows. The Tanya, the Brisa writes 2/3 of the way down. Kuf Tesvav Mid Aleph. Yochel yehei korchan bevas achas ve'ochlan kederech shehillel ochlan. They called him out. You might have thought that you can wrap everything up in one perfect burrito. Let's assume it was a soft one for the moment. Everything. By the way, could you imagine? Could you imagine the Hillel sandwich in a soft shell with some lettuce and Korban Pesach in the middle? That sounds gewaldic. That sounds amazing. So I heard in a shiur today that Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, he buys Sephardic matzah for the Hillel sandwich. So he can mamish wrap it up like a burrito and eat it like as I mentioned. Instead of crumbs flying everywhere, you got charosas dripping down your face. We're going to discuss charosas tonight. Great sugya. Anyway, it says the Gemara, how do we know that you cannot do what Hillel says? Talmud Lomar, the dissenting opinion that rejects the sheet of Hillel the Tana that you make a sandwich. Talmud Lomar, the same pasuk, al matzos imron yochluhu, afilu zebifnei atzmo v'zebifnei atzmo. Lavdavka, that they can even be separated. It says the Gemara, what is that? What does it mean afilu? You said you cannot do what Hillel says, and you're like, well, even if it's separate, which implies that what Hillel did was okay. So maskif lo Ravashi, yachi maya afilu. What's the language of afilu? If you say that you can even have the maror and matzah separate, it implies that you can also have it together. Hillel's not wrong. You're just expanding to say that there's other ways to be yosei. So then says the Gemara, you're right. Ella Amar Ravashi, they're really not fully dissenting, a fully dissenting opinion. They're just expanding Hillel's opinion. Hi, Ella Amar Ravashi, 8 lines from the bottom. Hi, Tana Hachik Tani. This is what this brisa means. Yachol lo yetze bohen yedei chovason kin korcham nevasachas v'chon derech shehillel ochlan. You might have thought that the only way that you're going to be yotze is like Hillel, when you wrap it all up into one in the burrito. Perfect. So it says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar, the brisa would understand. No, al matzos remem yochluhu, that it can be either way. You might have thought that by Hillel that the only way to be yotze is when it's al matzos remem yochluhu, that it's all together. Talmud Lomar, that's not true. When the pasuk says al matzos remem yochluhu, what does it mean? Says the Gemara, first of the long lines, Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph, afilu ze bifnei atzmo, v'zeh bifnei atzmo, even if they're separate. So the Machlokes Tanaim plays out as follows. Hillel the Tana holds that you are allowed to make a sandwich out of them, and you're yotze that way. And maybe implied in the Gemara is that that's the only way to be yotze. Says the next sheet on the Tanaim, no, it's also that way, but not only that way. Yes, you can do what Hillel said to be yotze, but you can also eat the matzah separately and the mar separately. Okay. So now, what? Separately, matzos and marorim. You can eat them separately. It's hard to read in the pasuk. I'm asking with you, and some of the Meforshim picked up on that as well. That they played off on the vav of umirorim. Is it like a vav that is totally shifting it to another camp? I did hear one approach like that. You're asking a great question. That's a great pickup in the pasuk. But some of the poskim answer that the letter vav here is not a stam of vav. It's meant to create a separation between the two. So it says the Gemara, halacha l'maisa, what do we do? Do we say that we're only going to be yotze with the Hillel sandwich, or can we also be yotze the other way? So we do both. That's why we eat so much matzah on Pesach Seder. Did you ever wonder? I always wondered this. Why do we eat a whole truckload of matzah, then we have maror, and then we have matzah and maror together? The answer is because of the following line in the Gemara. First of the long lines, Kuftas Vavanav Hashta, Itmar Hilchasa Loke Hillel V'lo Karabanan. We don't know which one is right. Is it like Hillel that you can only be yotze the kricha, or is it like the Rabbanan that you can even be yotze the other way? Says Gemara, Mevarech ala chilas matzah v'achil. First thing that you do is you eat it by itself, the matzah, and then v'hadar mevarech ala chilas mar v'achil. Then you eat the maror by itself, and then v'hadar achil matzah v'chasav adei adade below bracha zecher lemikdash kehillel. That's why we eat so much, because we want to be yotze all of the shitas. It's a beautiful hashkafic approach. Normally we have a psak, pick one. How often do we do both? It's very rare in halacha that we do both things, right? So even like, okay, the people where Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, most people don't do that. By mezuzah, that's one exception, where the Ashkenazim put the mezuzah on an angle. That's one exception to the rule. Here's another exception to the rule where we do both, but it's not the standard. And we don't make a bracha on zecher and the mikdash kehillel because it was only a zecher, because l'chora we paskin like the Rabbanan, because we would hold yachid v'rab malacha kirabim. Nevertheless, the Gemara was clearly very sensitive to this, and this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch and in every Haggadah that we've ever seen, that Zecher Lemikdash Kehillel. So the Meforshim here highlight, when should you say the paragraph of Zecher Lemikdash Kehillel? If what you're saying is that we're trying to be Yotzei Hillel's approach, you should not be speaking now. You shouldn't be speaking from the time that you start, from the time you wash Netilas Yadayim for the sake of Achilas Matzah, until after Zecher Lemikdash Kehillel, until the Hillel sandwich is eaten. So some of the Meforshim point out that you should say the paragraph of Zecher Lemikdash Kehillel after you finish the sandwich. Says the Gemara on the bottom, a new sugya. I mean, all connected. It's all Pesach Seder. And all of this is going to be fresh in our minds by the time we get there. And you can tell your family when someone is complaining about the volume of matzah that we need to eat, you can say, it's because of the Gemara and Kuf Tes Vav. That's why we do the Zecher Lemikdash Kehillel sandwich, because we are honoring the Shita of Hillel, even though L'chora, Ladina, we paskin like the Rabbanan. New sugya. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oshia. Kol shetibula b'mashke tzarech netilas yadayim. The halacha is like this. And this is halacha l'maisa and in Shulchan Aruch. And I asked my Rebbe this question in Zmicha, and he said, I have no idea why people don't do this. The halacha is that if a person eats fruits and vegetables, and they are wet with any one of the 7 liquids that are able to transfer to yad shachatam, yayin, dvash, shemen, chalav, tal, dvash, dam, and mayim. So those are the 7 liquids. If they're wet with any of them, of course, blood you can't eat. You can't eat it, but it is something that is machshir tuma for other purposes. But if any of the 6 edible liquids, let's say that dip the apple in the honey, and stop during the week, you have to wash the tilas yadayim if you're going to do that. Why? Because tibul b'mashke tzarech netilas yadayim. This is not a din that's specific to to Hilchos Pesach. It's a din that's true year round. We don't make a bracha on it. Most people don't. The Gra paskins that you do. My first cousin holds of them and hagim of the Gra. And when he would wash by the Pesach Seder, by this din right here, when he washes by Karpas, he makes a bracha mamish. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvot tzivos tzadayim. That's what the Gra holds. It's the Maisa. It's no different than anything else than bread. So that's what the Gra holds. Most Ashkenazi Jews don't do that. Most Ashkenazi Jews don't wash, but that is the din in Shulchan Aruch. So there are exceptions to poskim, right? If you're eating with a fork, it's not problematic. If you know your hands won't get wet, it's not problematic. Well, but that is the din in Shulchan Aruch, and we should absolutely be trying to do this. We should tell the people in our orbits that is the din in Shulchan Aruch. It's quoted in what is it, Kuf Samaches? Let me just look up the actual Mar Makom. It's quoted in Kuf Nun Ches, in the halachos of Netilas Yadayim, that one is obligated to wash what we refer to as tibul b'mashke. That is the din in Shulchan Aruch. Amar Rav Papa Shmamina Hai Chasa. If that's true, it must be that this lettuce that we're talking about by Karpas tzarach l'shakue b'charoses mishum kafa. It must be that we had to dip the chasa. We had to dip the karpas into the charoses mishum kafa. Kafa is some type of dangerous element. It could be, some say the Rashbam writes it's tolaim, it's worms. Some say it's like a shade type of stuff, or some say it's just dangerous because it's not clean. But we have to dip it in the charoses, which has some type of vinegar element to it, to kill the kafa, whatever this is. And it must be that we're dipping it. Because if you don't have to dip the chasa, the karpas, into the charoses, then the tilas yadayim lamali. Why would I have to wash? The only time I have to wash is when the fruits or vegetables are wet. Ha lo naga. The karpas is not wet; it's dry. So then you don't have to wash at all. So says the Gemara, lavdafka v'dilma leolam eimalach lo tzarach l'shakui. Maybe we say that you don't have to actually dip it in the charoses. That's not true. And therefore, v'kafa me rechamais, maybe just to smell the odor that is given off by the charoses is enough to kill the kafa. Again, if it's tolaim, whatever it is, that it removes the concern. Some of the poskim say, how can the Rashbam say that it's worms? Even if you kill the worm, you can't eat a worm. It's a beria. The halacha is that when there's a beria, even if there's no bittul by a beria is a whole entity. So let's say you find a whole mosquito inside a dish. You saw it, and now you can't find it. You have to throw the whole thing out. There's no bittul by a beria. So what did you mean a worm? That's why some of the Meforshim don't like the Rashbam's shita, that you can't be talking about a worm, because if what you're saying here is just the smell of the charoses is going to kill the worm, well, maybe you've answered your question about netilas yadayim that the Gemara is posing, but you can't eat the food because you're not allowed to eat a beria. You're not allowed to eat a whole insect, even if it's very, very small, even if it's less than 1 in 60. So it says the Gemara, then, and maybe this is not a raya from our Mishnah that you have to wash netilas yadayim, because maybe the animal, maybe the kafa was killed by the smell, by the odor of the charoses. If that's the case, why is it that we would need netilas yadayim if the smell would work? So says the Gemara, because it's only out of concern of dilma mishkiule. We're not washing netilas yadayim because you're definitely going to touch the liquid, which is touching the chasa, which is touching the lettuce, the romaine. Rather, we're just a concern dilma. It's a perhaps concern. Rav Papa says, lo nishi inish mara becharoses. This is a little bit of a connected ancillary din. Rav Papa says we should not soak the charoses. We should not soak the maror into the charoses. It tastes very good. I love charoses. I could eat it by the spoonful. But the din by the maror is that it has to have merirus. So what Rav Papa says, this is also halacha l'maisa. Lo nishi inish mar becharoses. You should not let the maror sit in the charoses. Dilma agav chalye the tavlin mevatale the merure. Maybe because of the sweetness of the tavlin, maybe it'll be mevatel the bitterness, and that's it. So we dip it in the charoses to kill the kafa, to kill either the shadim or whatever is negative about it, and then we shake it off right away because uva'inan tamar or veleka. Because if you leave it in there for too long, the charoses has a sweet flavor. It's going to get rid of. This is lamaisa. I cannot tell you how many times in my life I've done this the wrong way. The maror is supposed to be bitter. It's got to be bitter. So you can't pile on, eat the charoses later. Right now with the maror, it has to stay bitter. Dip it in so that there's no problem of kafa, and then go so that there's nothing negative about about the maror, about the karpas, about the maror, and then you'll be fine. Then you can eat it. Okay. Adbere Rav Chizda l'Ravna ukva v'darash. Rav Chizda Adbere, he brought him up to the front of the room to give a drasha, and Ravna Ukva gave the following drasha: Natal yadav b'tibul rishon, notel yadav b'tibul sheni. If a person washes for the first tibul by karpas, he has to wash again for the second one by maror. So says the Gemara, what was he talking about? Was he talking about year round, or was he talking about Pesach? So it says the Gemara, 10 lines down, quarter of the way down, Kuf Tesvav Mebeis. Amru Rabbanan Kamed Rav Papa. Habe Alma Itmar. He must have been talking about year round, just in general, a general halacha that if you eat a fruit once and it was wet, wash your hands, and you're going to go eat a vegetable later, you also have to wash your hands. As the Gemara, if you want to say he's talking about Pesach over here, our sugya, our Mishnah, if you want to say that Ukva, what was his name? Sorry, Ravna Ukva, that he was talking about Pesach, you just washed. We're in the same Suda. You washed, you didn't get up again, you're not going anywhere. Says the Gemara, Amar Lahu, no, Rav Papa, Adi Rabba, Rav Papa said it's got to be the opposite. He said back to them, I disagree with you. It is Hacha Itmar. What Ravna Ukva was talking about had to do specifically with Pesach. Because they were talking about year round, why would you have to wash again? If someone brings out two different vegetables on the table, you're eating edamame and you dip it in dressing, and you're eating tomato and you dip it in dressing. Why do you have to wash twice? Elamai, well, back and forth. Well, Elamai, what else can you say? Hacha Itmar. Can't be about Pesach as we just discussed. So the Gemara pivots back. Well, what can it be? It's not this, it's not that, and it's not this. So then says the Gemara, Amre, here's the Gemara's answer. Really says the Gemara, this is discussing Pesach. And Kevan de Boile Meimar Agadata veHalila, since we have to read the Haggadah, and since we have to say Hallel, Dilma Asuche Asche Ledaite V'Noga. Maybe in the process of the Seder, from the time that you wash for Karpas until the time that you get to the Maror, maybe the halacha is that we're concerned that you're going to have a Hesach Hadas. And in the process of having a Hesach Hadas, so then we're afraid that you will have touched something that was tamei, and therefore you have to wash your hands again. That's what the Gemara concludes about the statement of Ravna Ukva, where Rav Chiza allowed him to give a shiur. Next, halfway down, Kuf Tesvav Mebeis. Amar Rava Bala Matzah Yatza. When it comes to a matzah, by matzah you have to be able to taste it, as we saw earlier, but it doesn't have a din of merirus like the maror does. However, Bala Maror lo Yatza. If you swallowed it whole and you didn't get to taste anything, so then that would not work. This is a difficult Gemara to understand in light of the Rashi we saw above, which said that the tam was seemingly le'ikuva, difficult to understand. But that's what the Gemara says, that if you were able to have the kazayis of matzah into one pill's worth, one swallowable pill's worth, fine. So then that would, and then you'd be yotze. However, when it comes to Mara, we would not say that. What if you swallowed them together, bala matzu Mara? This is reflective of the Gemara that we just saw earlier about doing korech, combining the two. The halacha is yedei matzah yatza, yedei Mara lo yatza. No difference at all. We assume the same halacha that you're allowed to be bolei matzah, you're not allowed to be bolei maror. And then says the Gemara as follows: krachan b'siv. What if you wrap up both matzah and morah in a sieve, in some type of wrap? So then uvalan, and you swallowed it that way. Afidei matzah nami lo yatza, because that was mevatel. That, like we said earlier, that was going to be mevatel, the flavor of the matzah. Amar of Simi bar Ashi, matzah lifnei kol echad ve'echad. Everyone should have their own matzah in front of them. Morah lifnei kol echad ve'echad. Everyone should have their own morah. V'charoses lifnei kol echad ve'echad. Everyone should have their own charoses. Ve'in okrenes tashulchan al lifnei mi she'omer haggadah. But when it comes to removing the table, which is a minhag that we're familiar with, we pick up the matzah. We don't really pick up our table because our structure is different. They had little dinner tables in front of them, but we do pick up the matzah. Sometimes we uncover it, sometimes we cover it, sometimes we pick it up. Whoever is reading the Haggadah, that is the person from whom we pick up the table. Rav Huna Omer, he argued. Rav Huna argued on Rav Simi bar Ashi. What does he say? Rav Huna Omer, we're 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page. He says, Kulhu nami lifnei mi she'omer Haggadah. Really, only the one person who has a Haggadah gets his own Seder plate. So many, many, many times over the years, would you like your own Seder plate? Would you not like your own Seder plate? And I don't know, like maybe, sure, why not? If you have an extra one, I'll take one. So that's really subject to this conversation. Says the Gemara, V'hilchasa ki Rav Huna. The halacha is that really only the person who's the Baal Haggadah needs it. And this is also quoted in Shulchan Aruch and Tafa and Gimel Siv Daled, that halacha l'maisa, not everybody needs their own Seder plate. Says the Gemara, Lamar Okrenes Shulchan. What's the whole deal? Why are we removing the table? So says the Gemara, the famous principle that we want to make sure that the children are curious about what's going on. So tonight, my wife went shopping and came home. All these plastic frogs are now going to be all over my house for the next 12 months, right? Because we're trying to create a scenario where kids are asking questions and also having a meaningful educational experience. Abai have a Yosef Kamid Rava. When Abai was younger, Abai was 4th century Amora, Rabba was older, and Rabba kind of took in Abai. Abai was a Yosem, as we've spoken about many times. Chaza, what did Abai see? He saw the Kamad le Taka Mikame. Taka is a table. He saw that he was removing the table, that someone removed the table from in front of Rabba. Amar Lahu, Abai is sitting at the table. He was younger. He says to the table, hey, wait a minute. Adayin lo kach linan. We didn't even eat yet. Asu kame akre taka may come on. And now everybody's taking the table away from me. What's going on? Says the Gemara, Amalei Rabba, patarta milo mamranishtana. Perfect. It's exactly what Chazal had intended. You do something a little bit off kilter, and Abayis responded in kind. Hey, what's going on here? We didn't even eat yet. That's exactly the point. So then he got it to the Vincha. Then Rabbah would say, do you know what happened? The Jews were stuck in Mitzrayim. And then you get into the whole Sibur Yetzias Mitzrayim. This was perfect. Manishtana. Omar Shmuel, 4 lines from the bottom. Kuf Tesvav Medbeis. Lechem Oni. Of course, the famous pasuk of Lechem Oni. Lechem she'onin alav dvarim. We say a lot of things about this bread. Tanyanami Hachi, a brisa that says something very similar, though with a slight difference. Lechem Oni, Lechem she'onin alav dvarim. Harbe. The first one doesn't say harbe. The second one does, but a similar idea that we say a lot of ideas about Lechem Oni davar acher. Yet another idea, Lechem Oni, ani ksibe, about similar to an ani. Not onin, not from the word onet to answer, but ani from someone who's poor. Ma ani shadarko beprusa, just like a poor person whose meals are often from broken pieces of bread. Afkan beprusa, we know that we have a broken piece of bread here as well. So that's what, if you look at Rashi here on the top, he explains this idea as well. Davar acher, top of Kuf Tezayin Amud Aleph. Davar acher madarko shel ani shehu masig v'ishto ofe. Afkan nami hu masig v'ishto ofe. Some of them before Shemir explain that when a couple is very poor, they're like scrambling to get food in their stomach. They're starving. So they're working parallel paths. He's heating the oven. The second she's done making the dough, they put it straight in the oven. They make their matzah to get to the meal quickly. They're starving. They're moving very quickly. That's why it says that humasik, he's burning the fire, the ishto ofa, and that would be a siman of anius as well. At the 2 dots, kufta zayim and aleph, 3 lines down. We said in the Mishnah there's a machlokas whether or not charoses is a mitzvah. Is charoses just stam, something that we use to remove the kafa, to remove the negative spirits or the dangerous elements of the maror, or do we say that there's a mitzvah minei ubei, an inherent mitzvah in charoses? So the first shita we saw was, as is quoted here in the 2 dots, af al pisha in charoses mitzvah, says the Gemara, v'lo mitzvah. Mishum mai maisile. Why? Why is it? Why do we talk about it? Why is it in the Mishnah? Why is it quoted in the Gemara? Why are we talking about it? Answers the Gemara. The answer we would have expected. Amar Rabami mishum kafa, because we know that there were some dangers involved in the chasa, and the kafa, the charoses was able to be fixed by the charoses was able to fix the kafa problem. So that's why we had it, but it wasn't a mitzvah inherently. That was shita number 1. Amar Rabasi kafa de chasa. The dangerous parts of chasa, of romaine lettuce, that can be fixed by chama. This word chama actually means radish, a strange usage of the word, but that's how the Meforshim explain this. Kafa de chama, what about the dangerous parts of a radish? How do we fix that problem? Karti, you can take a leek and fix that problem. Kafa de karti, chamimi. If you have kafa de karti, if you have the dangerous parts of leek, what should you do? That's chamimi, that you can use hot water for. And kafa de kulhu chamimi, really hot water can fix a lot of things. This was probably before the knowledge that bacteria is killed by hot water, but nevertheless, Chazal had some type of insight that hot liquids are helpful in solving some of these problems. And while the water is warming up, Name Hachi, you can say the following incantation. What do we think when we think about incantations? Shadim. That's why some of the Meforshim say that what we're talking about here is Shadim. That's what Kafa is talking about. It's talking about some negative spirit that can exist here. Kafa, dechir nalach. I'm mentioning you, V'leishe ben Asayich, who should sit with your daughters, Ulatamne kalaseich, and your 8 daughters-in-law. Okay, this I in the Meforshim here. Says Gemara, 2 dots, 8 lines down. We're going to get to the mission, then we'll stop for tonight. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok, Omer mitzvah. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok, in the Mishnah on the bottom of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, where we quoted this Mishnah. So that Mishnah there writes the taka, it is a mitzvah, and that's how the Mishnah, almost how the Mishnah closed out. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok, Omer, that it is a mitzvah. So it says the Gemara, that's great, but my mitzvah. What tapuach? What's going on here? You have the charoses. What is the charoses all about? So it says the Gemara, Reb Levi Omer zecher the tapuach. It reminds us of apples. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, Dibur HaMaschal zecher the tapuach. Almost halfway down in the Rashi section, about 10, 12 lines down. Zecher the tapuach. Shahayu yoldos b'neihen sham. Women would give birth by apple trees. I guess they were far out away from the reservation, and they were pregnant. They tried to hide their pregnancies in clothing, whatever they did, and they would do so below etzeh without screaming. They would be able to have children without making any sound. Shelo yakir ben mitzrim dechsiv tachas hatapuach orarticha. Famous pasuk from Shir Hashirim, a reference to that. That's one approach as to why we have charoses. Yes, it's a mitzvah, and we do so as a zecher. It's a mitzvah that is a zecher to the women who were giving birth in a very dangerous circumstance. And they did so in private, in relative private, away from the community under a tapuach tree. Rabbi Yochanan Amar zecher latita had to do with the clay that was used to build the buildings. Amar Abaye hilkach tzarich lekehave v'tzarich lismuche. We need to make sure, number one, that it's sour, that the charosas has a sourness or a tartness to it. Tzarich lismuche, and it also has to be thick. Lekehave, we have to make sure that it's a little bit sour, zecher letapuach, because the tapuach is a little bit sour. And as well, the tzarich lismuche has to be a little thick, zecher letita, to remind us of the clay that was used to make the bricks in Mitzrayim. Says the Gemara, Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan, Tavlin zecher leteven. With the spicing that we have by the charosas is zecher leteven, to remind us of the ground up straw that we were using to help make the bricks. Charosas zecher letid. This was a reference to the clay. Amar Reb Elazar Reb Tzadok ka chayu omrim tagre charech shebYerushalayim. Reb Elazar Reb Tzadok, who's the Baal Plugta in the Mishnah. He's the one who says that it's a mitzvah. That's right, Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok. It's the same thing, same person. So what does he say happened in the Yerushalayim? Tagre charach Yerushalayim. The salesman, the people who were, a tagar is a merchant, the people who were selling things in Yerushalayim, what would they say? Quote, Bo'u v'talu lachem tavlin the mitzvah. Come take the spices that are for the mitzvah. What mitzvah are we talking about? So that's what the Meforshim say here. We're talking about is the mitzvah of charoses, and that's where he gets his shita from. We'll stop right here, and we'll pick up tomorrow night with Kufta Zayin Amud Aleph at the Mishnah, 1/3 of the way down. If you have yet to sign up for our siyum, it's going to be at Avida. The siyum, the learning will start on time at 8:40. We're going to be upstairs. A special thank you to Mark Halpert and to Yitz Brandis for their help. $26 a person. You can Venmo me, you can pay me cash, Bitcoin, whatever.
What night?
No Bitcoin. Monday night. Monday night will be the same. Yes, on time. Yes. Have a good night, everybody. Have a beautiful night.